Welcome to an introduction to 18 U.S.C. Section 207A1, the Post-Employment Statute's permanent bar. In this session, you'll be introduced to the statutory elements of the A1 restriction, and we'll be providing clarifying summaries as well. We'll introduce a process you can use to help you apply the statutory elements to any facts you may have regarding an employee's proposed post-employment activities so that you can provide prospective advice. We'll then assign an exercise where you'll be asked to analyze the post-employment profile of a hypothetical employee and determine whether and how the employee's post-employment activities may be subject to the A1 restrictions. Once you've completed the exercise, you'll be asked to review the debrief of the exercise because it is in the debrief that we'll be examining more closely the definitions and the interpretations of the statutory elements. So what are the elements of 18 U.S.C. Section 207A1? We've broken out the A1 provision and its elements into this chart. A1 is a permanent bar, and it prevents a former employee from knowingly making any appearance or communication with the intent to influence to or before an employee of the United States if that communication or appearance is on behalf of any other person. The communication or appearance also has to be in connection with a particular matter involving specific parties in which the U.S. is a party or has a direct and substantial interest, provided that it is the same particular matter involving specific parties in which the employee participated personally and substantially while a government employee. So where are these elements of the statute defined? The implementing regulation for 207 is at 5 CFR Part 2641. The specific prohibitions for 207A1 are discussed in 2641.201. What does A1 bar? As we said when introducing the elements, 207A1 is a representational bar, and by representation, 207A1 is prohibiting communications or appearances that are made back to an employee of the United States as that is defined for purposes of A1, and is made with the intent to influence the government, if that is made on behalf of a third party. Now, these communications or appearances must be made in connection with specific party matters that the employee actually worked on personally and substantially while they were a government employee. So the restrictions of 207A1 are going to be confined to only the specific party matters that the employee worked on while they were in government service. In this sense, the A1 restriction is actually a rather narrow restriction. 207A1 does not bar self-representation. It does not bar behind-the-scenes assistance. It does not restrict where an employee can work or from whom an employee could receive compensation in a post-employment context, but it does apply to uncompensated as well as compensated activities. So what is the purpose of 207A1? We refer to 207A1 as a switching sides provision, and effectively what 207A1 is attempting to do is to prevent an employee from effectively being able to give unfair advantage to private persons and private interests by making unfair use of their prior government employment and affiliations. So who is covered and for how long? 207A1 applies to employees who worked on specific party matters. So any employee who during their government service participated personally and substantially in these matters we call specific party matters, which are things like contracts or grants or licenses or approvals or litigation. Anyone who's participated in those types of matters will have an A1 restriction with respect to those matters. And for how long does that restriction last? it will last for the lifetime of the specific party matter. So while specific party matters remain alive, remain ongoing, they will continue to have restrictions that employees will be placed on employees' abilities to communicate back to the government in connection with those matters. What do I need to know in order to give advice? In order to give advice on A1, we really have to begin with the critical piece of the restriction, which is the specific party matters. So the first step in our analysis is always going to have to be to have our federal employees identify for us, to the greatest extent possible, whether or not they were involved in specific party matters and what those specific party matters may have been. Once we know what the specific party matters are, then it's helpful to know what their post-employment plans may include, because here we want to be able to give them meaningful guidance with respect to what a prohibited communication or appearance might look like in the context of some sort of post-employment activity that they may be contemplating. So let's look at a very simple example. Let's say we have an FDA employee who works on drug applications. Drug applications are specific party matters. And we're going to talk about one in particular. Let's say the FDA employee participated in a drug approval application for the drug Humira. And the employee tells us that their post-employment activities are likely going to be prospective employment with AbbVie. Now, AbbVie is the pharmaceutical company that manufactures Humira. With this information, we can give the employee some very targeted guidance as to what appearances or communications he or she would be prohibited from making back to the government in connection with the Humira drug application and on behalf of their prospective employer, AbbVie. Now, those restrictions are going to reach not only to communications back to FDA, but also to the Department of Health and Human Services and to any executive branch department or agency, as well as to federal courts. So how do I conduct my analysis? What we have done to facilitate your analysis is to suggest an analytical process that is effectively going to take the elements of the statute that we have here in this table and group them into a series of steps. And the steps are these. We begin, as we mentioned, with government duties. Have the employee help you identify with them, any specific party matters in which they participated personally and substantially. Then we move on to ask about any known post-employment activities that they may be contemplating. And then we will look at those activities to see whether or not there's any likelihood that any of those activities would involve the same particular matters involving specific parties in which they participated personally and substantially, so that, again, prospectively, we can be helping them identify what potential limitations they may face in performing activities, certain types of activities, for their prospective employers or while engaged in post-employment activities for others. And this is what the process looks like when you take the elements of the statute and you plug them into the steps. And again, the implementing regulation for this is at 2641.201, and that's where we're going to be looking for definitions to help us understand better what the elements of the restriction are. So we've given you a practice exercise, and these are the following materials that we've given you. We've given you a profile of our hypothetical employee, who is Susan Johnson, who is a patent examiner at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. We've given you a worksheet where you will be able to apply the various elements of the statute in this worksheet, and we will be using this worksheet in the course of our debrief, we would ask you to only do an A1 analysis on our profile for Susan Johnson. We've also given you a copy of the implementing regulation, 5 CFR Part 2641. We've given it to you in the Federal Register version of the final rule because we will be making occasional reference to the preamble to that rule, which has additional interpretive guidance. We've also given you a summary of 2641. This is meant to be a desk reference or a job aid. It is not meant to substitute for the regulations when you're actually providing post-employment advice. The methodology for our practice exercise will be this. We will begin with the question, is Susan an employee for purposes of 207A1? And then we will go on to ask the next series of questions. Did Susan's duties include any particular matters involving specific parties? And did she personally and substantially participate in any of those specific party matters? With respect to what she may or may not do in a post-employment context, we're going to be talking about, so what is an appearance or communication? When is there an intent to influence? On whose behalf might Susan be making the appearance or communication? Whom may Susan not appear before or communicate with? What is the same particular matter? When is the U.S. a party, or does the U.S. have a direct and substantial interest? And then, are there any applicable exceptions to 207A1? Once you've completed the exercise, and we strongly encourage you to complete the exercise, you can then proceed to the video with the exercise debrief, where we will have applied, or we will apply, both the A1 provisions, or both the A1 provisions to Susan's proposed post-employment activities. Thank you.